There's an old saying that many are probably familiar with. It says, life is short, better enjoy it while you can. There's another saying that most of you probably are unfamiliar with. It says, eternity is long, better prepare while you can. Then there's another saying which I've added. It says, time is short and many are unprepared. We need to be about our Father's business. Many of us have family and friends who are not yet prepared for eternity. Many have not yet made a personal commitment to Jesus, and many more think they are ready for heaven because they were baptized or christened as an infant. They don't realize that going to heaven requires a personal relationship with Jesus. These teachings are to serve us to win our lost family and friends to Jesus before time runs out. Welcome to Making Revelation Simple. This is a commentary on the book of Revelation, which is based on the Three Woes series of books. In this session, we will be covering Revelation chapter 15. You might wonder why we call Revelation chapter 15 John's third view of heaven. Chapter 4 was his first view, and chapter 7 was the second view. However, it's quite obvious that John has had many other glimpses of heaven that he's given us between chapters 7 and 15. So what makes these three views so special? The answer to that question involves the various created beings that John tells us he sees in each of these three views. In chapter 4, we discussed that the raptured saints and Jesus were nowhere to be seen. In chapter 7, we see a great multitude gathered before God's throne, and Jesus the Lamb is there as well. So why is this important? What truths can we learn from these three views of heaven? Mainstream prophetic teaching tells us that the great multitude from Revelation chapter 7 consists of the individuals who got saved during the Great Tribulation. The teaching goes on to proclaim that this multitude is part of a great end-time revival. The problem with this teaching is that everyone who refused to worship the beast and chooses to trust in God, except those few who fled to Judea, will be beheaded. Does the scripture tell us anywhere that these individuals from chapter 7 were beheaded? Well, the answer is no. The only place where a group of beheaded people are seen in the book of Revelation is in chapter 20, and they are directly tied to the people who refuse to worship the Antichrist. They are the same people we see described in verse 2 of chapter 15. Revelation 20, verse 4 says, "And I, John, saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads nor in their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. And then Revelation 15:2 kind of parallels that and goes with it. It says, "And I saw, as it were, a sea of glass mingled with fire, and them that had gotten the victory over the beast, and over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name, stand on the sea of glass, having the harps of God." So these three views of heaven debunk the concept of a great end-time revival. They also prove that the chapter 7 multitude is the glorified church that was just raptured at the end of chapter 6 with the opening of the sixth seal. This third view of heaven also proves that the number of those who will be beheaded to be a much smaller group than the number of those who were raptured with the opening of the sixth seal. And how do we know that? The answer to that question involves the various created beings that John tells us he sees in each of these views. In chapter 4, we discussed that the raptured saints in Jesus were nowhere to be seen. In chapter 7, we see a great multitude gathered before God's throne, and Jesus, the Lamb, is there as well. So why is this important? What truths can we learn from these three views of heaven? Well, in verse 2, the beheaded ones are seen standing on the sea of glass. That's in chapter 15. The sea of glass can't be seen in chapter 7 because the great multitude, but it can be seen there in chapter 15. The number of those who refused to worship the beast was so small that part of the sea of glass is still in view. Chapter 15 proves that there will not be a great end-time revival following the rapture, and the number of those who refuse to worship the beast will be very small. So let's continue on looking at Revelation 15, verse 1. John says, I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels having the 7 last plagues, for in them is filled up the wrath of God. Now, it's not clear why John put verse 1 here. It seems like it would fit better if it was inserted between verses 4 and 5. Nevertheless, John did place it here. So let's look and see if we can discover why. After telling us about the angels harvesting of the grapes of the earth and putting those grapes into the great winepress of God's wrath, John begins to tell us about a group of 7 angels. John points out that these 7 angels have 7 plagues. He indicates that these 7 plagues are filled with the wrath of God. Maybe that is why John put this verse where it is. Maybe he's trying to convey the message that God's wrath is overflowing, as are each of the vials that the angels are about to pour out in chapter 16. Let's continue on looking at verses 2 through 4. John goes on, says, I saw as it were a sea of glass mingled with fire, and them that had gotten the victory over the beast, over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name, stand on the sea of glass, having the harps of God. And they sing the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb. As John's attention is turned away from the 7 angels, he notices a sea of glass. This is the same sea that John had seen back in chapter 4, but it could not be seen in chapter 7. This time, however, the sea of glass is mingled with fire. It isn't clear why the sea of glass is mingled with fire, but it seems to be connected to the angel from Revelation 14, verse 18. Remember, this angel that came forth from the altar had power over fire. This is the angel that released the one we called the Grim Reaper to harvest the grapes of the earth. In verse 2, John introduces us for the first time to the individuals who had gotten the victory over the beast and over the beast's mark. These individuals have harps and they're singing. They're singing both the song of Moses and the song of the Lamb, which seems to indicate that this group is made up of both Hebrews and Gentiles. Notice that John always refers to the raptured church as the great multitude, and to those who refuse to worship the image of the beast as them or they, indicating a small group. The raptured church is a very large group, and the beheaded ones are a very small group. Revelation 15, verses 5 through 6. John says, and after that I looked, and behold, the temple of the tabernacle of the testimony in heaven was opened, and the 7 angels came out of the temple, having the 7 plagues, clothed in pure and white linen, and having their breasts girded with golden girdles. As we reach verse 5, John once again turns his attention back to the 7 vile angels as they exited the temple of the testimony. John tells us nothing of what transpired in the tabernacle. This may be due to the fact that verse 8 states that no man was able to enter the temple. Therefore, John was unable to see what took place there. It is also interesting that John did not describe these angels as they were entering the tabernacle, but he now sees them clothed in pure and white linen, wearing a golden girdle, just like the remainder of God's armies in chapter 19. And Revelation 19:14 says, and the armies which were in heaven followed him, being Jesus, upon white horses, clothed in fine linen, white and clean. Notice that these angels had the 7 plagues when they entered the tabernacle, and they still have them as they leave. What they do not yet have are the vials that are filled with the wrath of God. The vials will be given to the angels at the end of chapter 15 and will be poured out in chapter 16. So Revelation chapter 15, verses 7 and 8 says, one of the 4 beasts gave unto the 7 angels 7 golden vials full of the wrath of God, who liveth forever and ever. And the temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power. And no man was able to enter the temple till the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were fulfilled. The first thing we see happening in verse 7 is one of the 4 beasts, a cherubim angel, giving a vial to each of the 7 angels. We are told that these vials are full of the wrath of God, but we aren't told much more about them, or are we? If we go back to chapter 5, we see the 4 beasts and the 24 elders with golden vials. These vials are full of the prayers of saints. Then as we move forward to chapter 8, we see an angel with a golden censer offering incense and the prayers of the saints before the throne of God. John tells us that the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. So here we see those verses. Revelation 5, verse 8, and when he had taken the book, the 4 beasts and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, having every one of them harps and golden vials full of odors, which are the prayers of the saints. And Revelation 8:3 says, and another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar, which was before the throne. And verse 4 continues and says, and the smoke of the incense which came with the prayers of the saints ascended up before God out of the angel's hands. The vials full of the prayers of the saints appeared to have been transformed. While they were in the presence of God within the temple, the vials became full of the plagues and wrath of God. These vials, now full of the plagues and wrath of God, will soon be poured out upon mankind by the vial judgment angels. This will take place in chapter 16. This concludes our commentary on Revelation chapter 15. Continue on to the next video to watch our commentary on Revelation chapter 16. Thank you for watching.